Welcome to the podcast. My name is Peter Martin. I'm a DUP MLA for North Down, and I am joined by Lord Dodds of Duncairn, who, if he's all right, I will call Nigel
Yes.
from here on in. And recently, Nigel, you were out on a parliamentary trip to Israel, which is what we're going to be discussing today. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about where you went to during your trip to Israel? We just start off there, and obviously, in chatting earlier, you were saying you were at some of the places where the October 7th attacks took place. Do you want to tell us a wee bit about that?
Yeah, so we had a very, very intensive visit to Israel. Israel's quite a small place,
It is.
really, as you know, Peter, having been there previously, both from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and then from north to south, very easy to traverse. We were taken down to the Gaza envelope as the surrounding area of Gaza itself, which
Mm,
itself is only 25 miles long by 15 miles wide.
that's
You
right.
sort of
Yeah.
don't realize when you hear the news reports just how small the geographical area is. And we visited uh, some of the kibbutz that were attacked by Hamas terrorists, and the way in which they're now lying deserted,
Mm,
apart from a handful of people who've gone back, the numbers of people who were killed there. These are very close communities.
yeah.
We visited the Nova site where the music festival happened, and there now it has become almost like a massive shrine to the victims. There's a notice up for every single victim, their picture, their life story, and thousands of Israelis are visiting this site daily, just to pay homage and to remember the victims, and some horrendous stories of how people were hunted down and murdered in cold blood. There's a dumpster there where 8 or 9 young people hid for hours while they were absolutely terrorized, Hamas terrorists looking for them. Eventually found them. Most of them were murdered. A couple of them survived. It's just horrendous stories of how people were targeted, no matter their age or anything else. And then on the main highway, which runs alongside Gaza, the 232, where all those cars were
Yeah.
attacked and people were dragged from them, and some of them murdered in cold blood and taken hostage. In fact, the Israelis have created a compound now where all these cars have been gathered up. And originally it was just meant to be because there's nowhere to take them. They're all
Mm.
shot up and wrecked. And it's now become again another memorial site where people come along and pay homage and remember the horrific events of 7th of October. So that's really very, I mean, when you visit that, you realize the trauma that the Jewish people have gone through as a result
Mm.
of 7th of October, the scale of the horrors and the individual misery and suffering that was inflicted on families.
I mean, you told me earlier as we're just sitting more or less chatting about this story, and it's worth sharing about the family, the mum and dad and the baby.
Hmm.
Can you tell that story?
Yeah, I mean, we went to Hostage Square, which is in Tel Aviv,
Yeah.
where there's a daily vigil for all the hostages. There's still about 70
Hmm.
hostages. About half of them, the Israelis know that are
Are
dead,
dead. Yeah.
unfortunately. So right from day one, people have gathered in what's become known as Hostage Square. We met a man there whose sister. He told us the story of his sister and her husband and young baby on the 7th of October, driving along that 232 highway, abducted by Hamas, put in the back of a truck, heading over towards Gaza at speed. They were stopped for some reason. The Hamas terrorists stopped the vehicle. They decided they would take the opportunity to jump out and try to run, although
Yeah.
it's like a no man's land. It's a
It's very
long way to
open.
go.
Yeah.
And he told it with tears in his eyes. I remember he said about how his sister tried to keep up. Her husband was running with their young baby. She couldn't keep up, and she just said, "Look, go, save yourself, save the baby. I'll be all right." He went on in tears, obviously, and carrying the baby. He was rescued. She was captured again by Hamas, taken into Gaza. But thankfully, the story has a happy ending for them, though traumatic, in that she was released in one of the first waves of the hostage releases.
Mm.
But he still goes and she still goes every day and night to Hostage Square in solidarity with others. But that's just one example. We know about the Bibas family, of course.
Mm.
Cherie Bibas and her two children who were abducted. Anne Yarden, her husband, who was eventually released in an emaciated state, didn't
Yeah.
even know that his family had been murdered. And we were there that Thursday when the Bibas family were returned, their bodies were returned to Israel, and there was just a sense of national mourning and deep despair in the country, palpable. Shops were closed. So look, the level of trauma that the Jewish people, that Israeli society has feels, I think, is not something that can be really understood unless you talk to people and meet them and see them and feel their agony and their sense of horror of what happened and that it could
Mm.
happen and that they
Yeah.
were left defenseless.
Yeah. Yeah. And just even reflecting on that story, I mean, it's just that moment. If you imagine, because we've got kids, and you imagine being in that
Yeah,
situation with a baby, husband and wife, and your wife saying, "Take the baby and
yeah,
just keep going." I mean, it's that, if you actually sort of just think about it, the trauma and desperation. I mean, it blows my mind. But anyway, I want to move on because I know our time is relatively tight. I mean, did you meet any IDF personnel over there? I'm not asking you to go into any
mm,
details, but I mean, in terms of how the IDF have responded,
yeah.
do you want to talk
Yeah,
about that in
no,
general terms?
we did meet IDF personnel. I mean, the individual bravery of these soldiers and others is just incredible. We met one young guy who was badly injured in fighting Hezbollah in Lebanon, and he's a young guy who was about to start university, and he just gave up everything, basically joined the force. And there's been an incredible rallying around by young people in Israel to
Mm. Okay.
defend the state of Israel and the Jewish people. We met another young girl, only 19, who was on the border with Gaza the day that this atrocity happened on the 7th of October, and four of her colleagues, young women, were taken hostage, and they were the ones that were recently released. You may remember
Yep.
the pictures of the four young Israeli
That's right.
women soldiers who were released. They were her colleagues, and she escaped being taken hostage because she was elsewhere just at that moment in time. But they were the watchers, as it were. They were watching what was going on and reporting back to their
Hmm.
superiors. Um, so just incredible, very, very young. I mean, these are not sort of seasoned soldiers; these are
Yep.
young people. And what struck me, of course, obviously the IDF, highly regarded in many ways, but there is in Israel today a real sense that the government, first of all, let people down badly by
Yep.
allowing this to happen or being not able to prevent it. And secondly, the IDF. I mean, senior IDF people that we met admit they did not do their job properly. There's
Yep.
massive failings, and obviously people are now awaiting what will probably be a pretty thorough investigation and inquiry
Yep.
when they finally get all the hostages back as to who's responsible for the massive lapse in security. Because I think people couldn't believe that so many Hamas terrorists were able to launch such a widespread offensive against innocent people and get away with murdering
Yep.
so many. I mean, it just was unthinkable to them that this could happen, and yet it
Yep.
did.
Yep. And we reflect on organizations like Shin Bet and Mossad,
Yeah,
two, very competent, worldwide respected intelligence organizations, and sort of reflect and think, and ask that very legitimate question. And I'm sure the Israeli government is asking it, how
absolutely.
could this actually how could this happen? Um, in terms of, I mean, there's that very personal element of it all. I mean, when you're out there, do you meet with any politicians? And if so, sort of, how were they reflecting on how Israel feels at this point in
Yeah,
time? And you may want to touch, if you're, for example, in the West Bank,
yeah.
any conversations you
Well,
had there?
we met politicians of all parties in Knesset, the Israeli parliament in Jerusalem. But we also felt it was very important to go to the West Bank and meet with Palestinian Authority leaders in Ramallah, because I think when you're on a fact-finding mission, you're looking to you want to see on the ground what's happening
Yeah.
across the board, and that was facilitated by the Israelis. We went over. We had a very good discussion with a number of representatives of Palestinian civic society,
Hmm.
Palestinian business people, um, who laid it out very starkly about their feelings at the current situation. Were not, of course, at all supportive of what Hamas had done.
Hmm.
And when we met the Palestinian minister, one of the ministers in the Palestinian Authority government, he was very adamant. He came out straight away and condemned Hamas. And some people in Northern Ireland and Britain and Europe, they sort of think, well, we have to sort of give excuses for Hamas or give
Yeah.
reasons. This was a Palestinian political leader making there's absolutely no excuse, condemned it outright. I thought
Yeah.
it was quite refreshing, actually.
Absolutely.
Now, of course, he was making points about the two-state solution and about
Sure.
Israel and all the rest of it. Fair enough. But I think some people in our group were saying, well, it's about time some people in Europe heard what Palestinians in responsible position are saying about Hamas. And I think now there's a consensus across the board that Hamas can never again play a leading role in governing Gaza, because
Mm.
they have proven that they're only interested in terrorism and wiping the Jewish people out. Um, and when we met politicians in the Knesset, as I say, we met Likud, Bibi Netanyahu's party, met the Speaker of the Knesset, who's in his party, and also opposition leaders, Benny Gantz, the Blue and White Party, and politicians in Israel. They're very fiercely, aggressively opposed to each other. People
Sorry.
have the
Yeah.
idea that all of Israel is a homogenous
But they're not.
viewpoint, but they really, we think politics here is
Cut and thrust.
quite cut and
Yeah, it's a
thrust.
different ball game in Israel.
The Knesset is a
Yep.
balling match most of the time, and it's
Yep.
mainly, these parties having a go at each other, and they spared. And Gantz was scathing of Netanyahu.
Yep.
We met with Lapid, who's the other opposition leader, former prime minister. Again, absolutely was going to Washington to lay out a plan. Again, scathing of Netanyahu. The new Labour leader, Labour used to be a big party in Israel, has
Hmm.
fallen away badly. Isaac Herzog, the current
Hmm.
president, that's his party,
That's right.
with Belfast links, of
Yeah, of
course.
course. Yeah.
Um, they're on the way back, because the leader of that party has made a bit of a name for himself, in that on the 7th of October he was at home in Tel Aviv, saw what was happening. He's a former very senior member of the Israeli Defense Forces, grabbed a gun, grabbed his uniform, went down to the Nova site and so on, and started
Wow.
rescuing people on his own account. So, I mean, really, personally, incredibly brave guy, and so hopefully he will be able to play a big role in public politics going forward. So yes, but the thing that came across from all Israeli politics, regardless of their differences, and they have many,
Yep.
was security, security, security.
That's
They are
interesting.
determined that whatever happens, whatever deals are done going forward, the most important thing above everything else is never again will people be allowed to be attacked in Israel in this way, and that they must have security.
Yeah.
And that was the number one issue that came across, understandably, of
Oh,
course.
of course. And certainly in the aftermath of October the 7th, I mean, I remember seeing stories, and there was a retired 83-year-old gentleman, who wanted to volunteer for service in the IDF,
Mm.
and I remember saying to my dad, if this is you, this gets to be you going forward,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they found him a role probably in the back room somewhere,
yeah,
but there
yeah,
was that very cohesive sense after October the 7th that everybody sort of stood up
yeah,
and wanted to do something. And again, just reflecting on your answer there, I mean, the soldiers they have, and we were talking about 18 and 19-year-old
yeah,
boys and girls,
yeah,
really, really young men
yeah.
and women who are in the IDF and having to take Hamas on their doorstep. Um, I mean, in terms of just that issue, and I don't necessarily want to get into what the solution is,
Yes,
but
yes.
one of the things you reflect, and you might want to reflect on this. I mean, even as you sort of said there about Hamas, I mean, is it clear to you in the discussions that have been had, the sort of geopolitical discussions? I mean, with refugees, Egypt doesn't want to take too many people
mm,
from Gaza.
mm,
Jordan doesn't want to
mm.
take too many people from Gaza. And very often, I mean, I sort of think, well, that's because they know that, you know, they don't want terrorists in their country. You know, they close off the borders and people are wondering why, you know, but it is actually those countries which are Arab countries,
Yes.
they don't want Hamas there. I mean, do you think that's a legitimate kind of argument?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that that's one of the things that's striking about the Middle East situation is that countries that one would expect to be right behind what sometimes the most extreme elements of in the Palestinians would say and do are very far from that. I mean, as
Hmm.
people know, there are actually very strong links in many cases between Israel's interests and the interests of the Emiratis and the Saudis and all the rest of it.
Jordan,
But
yeah,
they don't
absolutely.
speak about it openly
No.
normally. And of course, this whenever there's a flare up in violence and all the rest of it in the Israel area, West Bank or Gaza, then they have to be cognizant, these other countries, of their populations and their
Yeah.
feelings and all the rest of it. But one of the things I think that came across and provided a little bit of hope was, and to some extent, I mean, Trump's idea for Gaza, which everybody knows is outlandish, and in my view, it's just the output out there, but it'll never happen.
Yeah.
And but what that sort of talk about sort of things that haven't been talked about before, and the fact of the level of the violence in Gaza, what has brought about is an involvement and a recognition by places like Egypt, the Emirates,
Yep.
Saudi Arabia, that they actually have to take some responsibility. That can't be left to the United States or the European Union
Yep.
or Israel or whatever, but that these Arab states need to actually themselves take responsibility and see. So the Arabs had a summit to talk
Hmm.
about what could be done. Now, this is something that they've wanted to shy away from for decades.
Yep.
So I think in that sense, that provides a little bit of hope because obviously with Palestinian involvement, of course, whatever happens in the future of Gaza has to involve Palestinians. But if you have Arab states involved as opposed to Western states or Israel or whatever, then that gives a much better opportunity, hopefully,
Yeah.
for a lasting peace. I mean, at the end of the day, the Saudis are the custodians of some of the most holy sites in Islam. And
Yep.
so they have a special place in the Islamic world. And I think there's a need for those countries to step up and do more, taking refugees, providing aid, but also politically and security wise.
I agree, and that's probably where the solution lies. But I mean, to a degree, you can also see it from Egypt, Saudi, Jordan, that actually they are genuinely as you said, they don't talk about it out loud, but they're genuinely fearful
Yeah,
that by opening their borders, that they'll Hamas will be
yeah.
able to get in and spread their ideology, which is obviously very destructive. Just last question, because we are tight for time. I mean, in terms of the threat that the Jewish nation feels under, that Israel feels under its time, and we're still living with Holocaust survivors. We're still
Yeah,
living with people today. Like my mum, for example, my mum's 88. I mean, she was about my son's age when the war finished, so she's
yeah.
actually lived through that time of Holocaust and extermination. Do you still think that in Israel? I mean, you probably have got a good sense of that having visited recently. Do you still think that the Jewish people are fearful? You hear from the river to the sea. Are they fearful for their survival still?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why I say I think that the number one issue for them is security above
Mm,
everything else. And remember that in this recent conflict, 7th of October, yes, we had the attack from Hamas, but Israel has also been attacked right across the board. They've been
that's right.
attacked from Lebanon, they've been attacked from Syria.
Mm,
The Houthis in Yemen have attacked them.
yep.
Iran has attacked them directly, not through proxies, but directly by firing over a massive barrage of ballistic
That's
missiles
right.
to Israel, which were only stopped through the Iron Dome security system. They have been attacked, by multiple enemies. And if one good thing has happened in terms of the Syrian situation, at least Assad is gone now, an
Hmm.
Iranian proxy, and we don't know what's going to take its
Took place.
place there. It doesn't look that good, but certainly getting rid of an Iranian proxy leader in Syria is good. But you can understand with you see the barrage of attacks from enemies right across, not
Yeah.
just Hamas. You can understand why they do feel the way they do, and their history and experience proves that they're correct in that assessment. So I think, as I say, the overwhelming feeling that I came away from Israel and the West Bank, for that matter, and having seen what the suffering up close is the determination of Jewish society in Israel never to allow a repeat of that, to stand firm, to increase their security, but also a recognition among political leaders and people you talk to that there needs to be a political settlement as well.
Yeah,
And hopefully
absolutely.
that needs to involve, Arab states as well as the usual suspects.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, Nigel, thank you so much for coming in
Pleasure.
for the podcast. I really enjoyed that. I think it was really illuminating for me. Folks, I hope you enjoyed that too. And we'll see you again soon.